You're too stupid to be here.
Too stupid. Do you understand English, or should I draw you a picture?
Richard Blackwell's voice echoed through the open-floor office of Blackwell and Associates, bouncing off the glass walls and modern art installations that decorated the firm's Manhattan headquarters. 53 employees sat frozen at their desks, eyes glued to their screens, pretending they couldn't hear their CEO publicly destroying a junior analyst in the middle of the Monday morning meeting. Lily Chun stood in front of the projection screen, her financial analysis still displayed behind her, while her boss circled her like a predator who'd cornered wounded prey. The small recording device in her blazer pocket captured every word, every breath, every second of venom he spat in her direction. She'd started recording 3 weeks ago, after the 4th time he'd humiliated her. After the 2nd time he'd thrown documents at her head. After she'd realized that Richard Blackwell wasn't just a demanding boss. He was a monster in an expensive suit. My name is Lily Chun.
I'm 26 years old and 3 months ago. And 3 months ago, I thought landing a job at one of New York's most prestigious investment firms was the breakthrough of my career. I graduated top of my class from Columbia Business School. I'd interned at Goldman Sachs. I'd worked 80-hour weeks to prove myself worthy of a permanent position. But standing here, in front of colleagues who avoided my eyes out of shame and fear, I realized that talent meant nothing when your boss decided you were target practice for his ego.
This analysis, Richard continued, snatching the printed report from Lily's hands and waving it like contaminated evidence, is the work of someone who clearly cheated their way through business school. Tell me, Lily, who actually did your homework for you? Because there's no way someone this incompetent earned a degree from Columbia. Lily's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. Sir, if you'd let me explain the methodology. Methodology?
Richard laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that made several nearby employees flinch. You want to explain methodology to me? I've been doing this for 20 years while you were still playing with dolls.
Your methodology is garbage. Your projections are garbage. And frankly, you are garbage. He ripped the report in half, then in half again. Paper pieces floated to the floor like snow, settling around Lily's sensible black heels, the ones she'd bought on sale because her entry-level salary barely covered Manhattan rent. Richard dropped the shredded remains at her feet. Pick it up, he commanded. Lily looked at the paper scattered across the expensive hardwood floor, then back at Richard Blackwell, 48 years old, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than her monthly salary, with cold blue eyes that seemed to enjoy her discomfort. Behind him, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the New York skyline stretched endlessly, a view reserved for those who'd climbed to the top by stepping on everyone beneath them. She bent down slowly and began gathering the torn pieces. As she did, her mind flashed back to other moments. The time Richard had called her the diversity hire in front of a client. The morning he'd dumped coffee on her keyboard and told her to clean it up because assistants should know their place, even though she wasn't his assistant. The afternoon he'd assigned her a project, then reassigned it to a male colleague an hour before the deadline, letting her week of work go to waste while he praised the other analyst for excellent initiative. But Lily had noticed something Richard hadn't. When powerful men become comfortable with their cruelty, they stop watching their backs. They stop noticing who's listening. They definitely stop checking if they're being recorded.
You know what your real problem is, Lily?
Richard said as she straightened up, clutching the shredded paper. You were hired as part of some diversity quota to make the firm look good. But you don't actually belong here. You don't have what it takes. You're mediocre at best. And honestly, I'm doing you a favor by being honest about it now before you waste more of everyone's time. Something flickered across Lily's face, not tears, not anger, but something else. Something that made Richard pause for just a second, a shadow of uncertainty crossing his features before his arrogance swept it away. Do you have anything to say for yourself? He demanded. Lily looked at him, at this man who'd spent 3 months systematically trying to break her spirit. She thought about the recording device capturing every word. She thought about the call she'd made yesterday to her Uncle Thomas, the same Thomas Chun who'd built Chun Capital from the ground up, who now managed over $3 billion in assets,
who happened to be Blackwell and Associates' single largest client, representing 40% of their annual revenue. The same Uncle Thomas who'd warned her about taking this job, who'd offered to make a call on her behalf, who she'd refused because she wanted to succeed on her own merit. The same Uncle Thomas who'd told her last night, after she'd finally broken down and explained what was happening, record everything. Document everything. And when you're ready, we'll make sure justice is served. No, sir, Lily said quietly, her voice calm, despite the storm building inside her. I have nothing to say right now. Richard smirked, satisfied with what he thought was her defeat. Good. Get back to your desk and try not to embarrass yourself further today. Everyone else. Meeting dismissed. The office slowly came back to life, the sound of shuffling papers and relieved whispers filling the space as employees escaped back to their cubicles. Lily walked to her desk in the corner, the shredded reports still clutched in her hands. Aware of the sympathetic glances and the relieved faces of colleagues grateful it wasn't them this time. She sat down, opened her laptop, and pulled up her email. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she composed a new message. Subject line: Documentation package, urgent. Recipient: Uncle Thomas. Attachment: 15 audio recordings spanning 3 months. 3 videos from her phone capturing paper throws and coffee incidents. Screenshots of abusive emails. Testimony drafts from 2 other former employees who'd quit because of Richard's behavior. But Lily didn't hit send. Not yet. She needed one more piece of evidence. One final, undeniable moment that would make Richard's downfall absolute and irreversible. And she had a feeling she wouldn't have to wait long. Bullies like Richard Blackwell never knew when to stop. As she closed the email draft and returned to work, Lily's phone buzzed with a text from her uncle. Board meeting next Tuesday. I'll be there in person. Are you ready? Lily typed back a single word. Soon. Across the office, Richard stood in his glass-enclosed corner office, already on the phone, already moving to his next power play, completely unaware that the stupid analyst he'd just humiliated was about to become his worst nightmare. He'd spent years building his reputation, his client list, his empire of intimidation. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated the quiet young woman in the corner who'd been documenting every single one of his sins. And if you're enjoying this story of workplace justice and want to see what happens when Richard Blackwell discovers exactly who Lily's uncle is, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Because what comes next will prove that sometimes the best revenge isn't served hot or cold. It's served with receipts, recordings, and a family connection that can destroy empires. The rest of Monday crawled by with the speed of continental drift. Lily kept her head down, reviewed market reports, and tried to ignore the weight of sympathetic stares from colleagues who'd witnessed her public execution. At 4:47 p.m., her desk phone rang. Lily Chen speaking. My office. Now. Richard's voice cut through the line before it went dead. Lily saved her work, grabbed her notebook, and made sure her recording device was still active in her blazer pocket. As she walked toward Richard's glass office, she caught the eye of Marcus Wells, a senior analyst who'd been with the firm for 6 years. He gave her a barely perceptible shake of his head, a warning. But Lily had stopped running from warnings 3 weeks ago. Richard's office was a monument to ego. Deals he'd closed lined the walls and framed certificates. Photos with senators, CEOs, and celebrities covered his desk. A leather chair that cost more than some people's cars sat behind a mahogany desk imported from Italy. He didn't look up when Lily entered. Close the door. She did, positioning herself so the small recording device had a clear line to his voice. I'm reassigning the Morrison account, Richard said, finally glancing up. You've been on it for 6 weeks, but clearly you're not capable of handling something this important. I'm giving it to Brandon. Lily's stomach dropped. The Morrison account represented 3 months of work research, financial modeling, client meetings she'd attended, projections she'd built from scratch. Brandon Mitchell was a junior analyst who'd been hired 2 months after her, who spent most of his time playing golf with Richard on weekends. Sir, I've completed 90% of the analysis. The client presentation is scheduled for Friday, and Brandon will deliver it. Richard interrupted, leaning back in his chair with satisfaction.
You'll hand over all your files by end of day tomorrow. And Lily? His smile was venomous.
Make sure you include clear notes because we both know Brandon will need to fix whatever mess you've made. This was theft. Professional theft of her work, her time, her opportunity to prove herself. But more than that, it was a pattern. Lily had watched Richard do this to others, assign projects to employees he targeted. Let them work themselves to exhaustion. Then hand the finished product to someone else while claiming the original analyst was inadequate. I understand,
Lily said, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest.
Good. Dismissed. Lily walked back to her desk, her mind working through scenarios. The recording was clear. The pattern was documented. But she needed something bigger, something that would make Richard's behavior impossible to defend or dismiss. As she sat down, her phone buzzed with an email. The subject line made her heart race. Chun Capital Quarterly Review Meeting. All senior staff required. She opened it. Next Tuesday, 10 a.m. Chun Capital would be conducting their quarterly review of Blackwell and Associates' performance.
It was the meeting where Uncle Thomas would decide whether to continue their
partnership, and 40% of the firm's revenue hung in the balance. All senior analysts were required to present their major accounts, including whoever was now handling the Morrison account. Which meant Brandon would be presenting Lily's work. Which meant Richard would be standing in front of Uncle Thomas, taking credit for a project built on the back of the woman he publicly humiliated. Perfect. That evening, Lily stayed late at the office, something she'd done every night for 3 months. Most employees cleared out by 6. By 7, only janitors and the obsessively ambitious remained.
Lily pulled up her meticulously organized files, every project she'd worked on, every analysis, every original document with her name and timestamp on it.
She created a backup drive, then another, storing them in 3 separate locations. At 8:30 p.m., Richard emerged from his office, briefcase in hand, probably heading to whatever expensive restaurant or exclusive club he frequented.
He paused at Lily's desk, surprised to see her still working.
You're still here? I'm not paying you overtime to sit around pretending to be productive. Just finishing up the Morrison handoff files, sir. I want to make sure Brandon has everything he needs. Richard studied her for a moment, his expression suspicious.
When powerful people abuse others for long enough, they sometimes develop a sixth sense for rebellion.
But then he shook his head, dismissing whatever instinct had triggered his concern. At least you're finally understanding your place. Maybe there's hope for you after all as someone's assistant somewhere else. He walked toward the elevator, calling back over his shoulder. Lock up when you leave. And Lily? Don't stay too late. Wouldn't want people to think you're trying too hard to compensate for your obvious limitations. The elevator doors closed. Lily waited until she heard the ding of his departure, then opened her bottom desk drawer. Inside was a folder she'd been compiling for 2 months, a folder Richard didn't know existed. Employment records of people who'd quit Blackwell and Associates in the past 3 years. Exit interview notes obtained from a sympathetic HR assistant who'd been one of Richard's victims before transferring departments. 12 people.
12 employees who'd left because of Richard Blackwell's abuse. 8 of them had been women.
7 had been people of color. 1 had been both a brilliant analyst named Jessica Torres who'd suffered a breakdown after Richard's harassment and had left the industry entirely. Lily had tracked her down last week, and Jessica had agreed to provide testimony if it ever came to that. I'm terrified of him, Jessica had said over coffee in Brooklyn. But if you're really going to do this, if you're really going to take him down, I'll help. Someone has to stop him. Lily closed the folder and locked it back in her drawer. Tomorrow she'd hand over the Morrison files to Brandon. She'd watch him accept credit for her work. She'd smile and nod and play the role of the defeated employee who'd learned her lesson, and Richard would think he'd won. But what Richard Blackwell didn't know, what he couldn't know because his arrogance made him blind, was that Lily's uncle wasn't just Chun Capital's founder. He was a man who'd built his empire on 2 principles: loyalty to family and zero tolerance for people who abused power. And when Thomas Chen walked into that quarterly review meeting next Tuesday, he wouldn't just be reviewing accounts. He'd be deciding whether Blackwell and Associates deserved to exist at all. Lily gathered her things and headed for the subway,
the recording device heavy in her pocket like a promise.
The November air was cold, but she barely felt it.
Her phone buzzed with another text from Uncle Thomas. "Dinner this Sunday? We need to talk strategy." She replied, "I'll bring the evidence."
All of it, as the subway carried her home through the tunnels beneath Manhattan. Lily thought about the girl who'd arrived at Blackwell and Associates 3 months ago. Eager, optimistic, determined to prove herself without family connections. That girl would have cried herself to sleep tonight. That girl would have updated her resume and started looking for another job. That girl would have let Richard Blackwell win. But that girl didn't exist anymore. In her place was someone harder, smarter, and far more dangerous than Richard Blackwell could imagine. Someone who'd learned that documentation was power. That patience was a weapon. That the best time to strike wasn't when you were angry, but when your enemy was too arrogant to see the blade coming. Richard Blackwell had spent 3 months trying to break Lily Chen. He'd humiliated her, stolen her work, undermined her confidence, and made her life a daily nightmare. He thought he'd succeeded. He thought she was just another casualty of his cruelty, another name on the list of people he'd driven away. What he didn't realize was that every insult had been recorded. Every stolen project documented. Every witness cataloged. And in 6 days, when he stood in front of Thomas Chen presenting results built on Lily's stolen work, he would finally discover that some people don't break when you push them down. Some people just start counting the ways they'll watch you fall. Sunday dinner at Uncle Thomas's penthouse overlooking Central Park was usually a warm family affair. Tonight, it felt like a war council.
Thomas Chen sat across from Lily at his dining table, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed the documentation she'd brought. 15 audio recordings, 4 videos, 12 witness testimonies,
email trails showing systematic discrimination, pattern analysis of Richard's targeted abuse spanning 3 years and 14 victims. The folder grew thicker with each page he turned, his expression darkening with every word he read.
"He called you a diversity hire," Thomas said quietly,
his voice carrying the dangerous calm of a man who'd built an empire by knowing exactly when to strike.
"In front of clients." "Multiple times," Lily confirmed, sipping her tea. "The recordings are time-stamped."
The client meetings had other witnesses. Thomas removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. At 62, he'd survived hostile takeovers, market crashes, and cutthroat competitors. But nothing made him angrier than watching someone harm his family. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I wanted to handle it myself. I wanted to prove I could succeed without your help." Lily's voice cracked slightly. "I thought if I just worked harder, if I proved my value, he'd stop. I was wrong. Men like Richard Blackwell don't stop, Lily. They escalate until someone forces them to stop." Thomas closed the folder and leaned forward. "Tuesday's quarterly review. Blackwell will present their performance. I'll be there with my entire investment committee."
"What do you need from me?"
"Just one thing," Lily said, meeting her uncle's eyes. "When Brandon Mitchell presents the Morrison account, my Morrison account, I need you to ask specific questions. Technical questions about the methodology, the data sources, the projection models. Questions only the person who actually built the analysis could answer." A slow smile crossed Thomas's face. "You want to expose him in real time. I want to watch him crumble when he realizes he's presenting work he doesn't understand to the man whose money keeps his company alive. And I want Richard Blackwell to stand there and watch his golden boy fail because he stole from the wrong person." Thomas pulled out his phone and began typing. "I'll have my team prepare the questions. Highly technical, deeply specific to your work. We'll make it impossible for him to fake his way through." He paused. "But Lily, you understand what this means? Once we do this, there's no going back. Richard will know you orchestrated this. He'll try to destroy you." "Uncle Thomas," Lily said softly. "He's been trying to destroy me for 3 months. The difference is now I'm ready to fight back." Monday morning arrived with the kind of cold rain that makes Manhattan feel particularly unforgiving. Lily arrived at the office at 7:30 to find Brandon Mitchell already at his desk, frantically reviewing the Morrison files she'd handed over. He looked up when she passed, his expression a mixture of stress and guilt. "Hey, Lily, do you have a minute?" She stopped, surprised.
Brandon had never spoken to her beyond basic pleasantries.
Sure. What's up?
He glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered his voice.
I know this is weird, but I need help with the Morrison presentation.
Some of these financial models are really complex, and Richard wants me to present it at the Chun Capital meeting tomorrow.
I don't want to mess this up. There it was. The admission she needed.
Brandon knew he hadn't done the work. He knew he was presenting someone else's analysis.
And he was asking the person he'd stolen from to help him fake his way through it. Lily could have said no. Should have said no, but she saw an opportunity.
I'll help you, she said, watching relief flood his face. But I need something from you.
When Richard asks you about the project, I need you to tell him the truth about who built it. Can you do that? Brandon's relief transformed into panic. Lily, I can't. He'll destroy me.
You know what he's like. I know exactly what he's like, Brandon.
That's why I'm asking. Do the right thing or face those clients tomorrow having no idea what you're talking about. Your choice. She walked away before he could respond, leaving him to wrestle with his conscience. It was a test. If Brandon chose integrity over fear, he'd become an ally. If he chose Richard's approval, he'd become another piece of evidence in her case. At 9:15, Richard called an impromptu senior staff meeting.
Lily arrived to find the conference room already filled with tense-looking analysts.
Richard stood at the head of the table, his expression somewhere between rage and panic.
Chun Capital moved up the quarterly review, he announced. It's tomorrow at 10 instead of next week. They sent the agenda this morning. He pulled up an email on the projection screen. They're requesting detailed presentations on our top 5 accounts. Morrison is on that list.
Brandon, you're presenting. Don't embarrass me. Lily watched Brandon's face drain of color. One day to prepare for a presentation he didn't understand.
In front of the firm's most important client, with his boss's entire reputation riding on his performance.
She almost felt sorry for him. Almost.
Anyone else have accounts on this list?
Richard continued, scanning the room.
His eyes landed on Lily. Chun, you're assigned to the Henderson portfolio, right?
Yes, sir.
Good. You'll present that one. Try not to humiliate yourself. I need Chun Capital to see that we have at least some competent analysts here. The jab landed exactly as he intended, drawing uncomfortable laughs from the senior staff who'd learned that joining Richard's cruelty was safer than opposing it. But Lily just nodded, already calculating. She'd be in that presentation room tomorrow. She'd have a legitimate reason to be there, to witness everything, to speak if necessary.
Richard had just handed her a front row seat to his own destruction. After the meeting, Lily returned to her desk to find an email from someone she didn't recognize, Jennifer Walsh, HR Compliance Director. Subject line, Confidential Inquiry. Her heart raced as she opened it.
Ms. Chun, I received your documentation regarding workplace concerns. I'd like to meet with you today at 3 p.m. in the HR conference room. Please don't mention this meeting to anyone. Jennifer Walsh. Lily hadn't sent anything to HR, which meant someone else had. She glanced across the office and caught Marcus Wells quickly looking away from her.
Marcus, who'd been at the firm for 6 years.
Marcus, who'd survived by keeping his head down.
Marcus, who'd witnessed every one of Richard's public humiliations and had done nothing.
Until now.
At 3 o'clock, Lily sat across from Jennifer Walsh,
a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd been with Blackwell and Associates since its founding.
Jennifer closed the conference room door and activated a white noise machine. Marcus Wells came to me this morning. Jennifer began without preamble.
He said you've been documenting Richard Blackwell's behavior.
He said if I wanted to finally do something about a problem this company has ignored for years, I should talk to you.
So here I am. Talk.
Lily hesitated. HR departments protected companies, not employees.
But she looked at Jennifer's face and saw something unexpected. Exhaustion mixed with determination.
The expression of someone who'd watched wrongdoing for too long and was finally ready to act. I have recordings, Lily said carefully.
15 of them.
Video evidence. Witness testimonies from former employees. Pattern documentation spanning 3 years.
Email trails. Everything time-stamped and organized.
But I need to know, are you here to help me, or to protect the company from a lawsuit.
Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out her own folder.
I've been documenting Richard Blackwell for 7 years. Every complaint that mysteriously disappeared. Every settlement paid to former employees in exchange for NDAs.
Every time the partners chose revenue over ethics because Richard brings in money. She opened the folder, revealing a paper trail that matched and exceeded Lily's own documentation.
I'm here because I'm tired of watching brilliant people get destroyed while abusers get promoted. And I'm here because tomorrow, when Chun Capital walks into that meeting, I want to make sure they see everything. Lily stared at the folder, then at Jennifer.
You've been waiting for this.
I've been waiting for someone brave enough to fight back.
And connected enough that the partners can't just pay them off and bury it. You're Thomas Chun's niece.
They can't touch you without touching their biggest client.
You're the opportunity I've been waiting for.
They spent the next hour coordinating. Jennifer would be present at tomorrow's meeting as HR oversight.
She'd have her own documentation ready. If Richard tried to retaliate, she'd have grounds for immediate intervention.
And crucially, she'd already contacted 3 former employees who'd signed NDAs, informing them that if the case went public, their agreements would be void under whistleblower protections.
He's going to lose everything, Jennifer said as Lily prepared to leave.
His reputation, his position, possibly his career. Are you prepared for how ugly this might get?
Lily thought about 3 months of humiliation.
About the work she poured her heart into, stolen and given to someone else. About Jessica Torres, who'd left the industry entirely because Richard had broken her spirit.
About every person who'd walked through these doors believing in meritocracy and excellence, only to discover that cruelty could coexist with success if the cruel person made enough money.
I'm ready,
Lily said. That evening, Lily received a text from Brandon. Can we talk?
They met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office.
Brandon looked like he hadn't slept since their conversation that morning. I can't do this, he said immediately.
The Morrison presentation. I've been reviewing your files all day and I barely understand a quarter of it.
Richard's going to destroy me when I screw it up. Then tell him the truth, Lily said simply.
Tell him I did the work and you're not prepared to present it.
He'll fire me. Maybe. Or maybe he'll respect honesty more than watching you fail in front of Chun Capital. Brandon laughed bitterly.
You don't actually believe that.
No, Lily admitted.
But I believe you have a choice. You can present work you stole and fail publicly, or you can tell the truth and fail privately. Either way, Richard's going to be angry.
The question is whether you want to keep your integrity. Brandon left without committing to anything, and Lily knew she couldn't count on him. But that was fine. She didn't need Brandon to expose Richard. She just needed him to be standing there when everything unraveled, so he could see the cost of enabling cruelty. That night, Lily laid out her clothes for tomorrow's meeting.
Professional navy suit. Conservative heels. Minimal jewelry.
She looked at herself in the mirror and saw someone different from the eager graduate who'd started at Blackwell and Associates 3 months ago. That person had believed the system was fair. This person knew better.
This person had learned that sometimes justice doesn't arrive on its own. Sometimes you have to build it, piece by piece, recording by recording, witness by witness, until the weight of evidence becomes impossible to ignore.
Her phone buzzed with a final text from Uncle Thomas. Everything's ready. See you at 10. Stay strong. Lily texted back. I'm not just strong anymore.
I'm ready to watch him burn.
Tomorrow morning, Richard Blackwell would walk into the Chun Capital Quarterly Review expecting routine business. He'd watch Brandon present the Morrison account, taking credit for mentoring a rising star.
He'd network with the firm's most important client.
He'd continue building the empire he'd constructed on the backs of people he'd broken.
But what Richard Blackwell didn't know, what he couldn't know because he'd spent 3 months underestimating the woman he thought he'd defeated, was that tomorrow wouldn't be about quarterly reviews or account performance. Tomorrow would be about receipts, recordings, witnesses, and a reckoning that had been 3 years in the making.
Some fires start slowly, one match at a time, until suddenly everything is burning. Tuesday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of November day where Manhattan's skyline looked sharp enough to cut glass.
Lily arrived at the office at 8:30 to find the conference room already being prepared for Chun Capital's arrival. Catering staff arranged pastries and coffee. IT technicians tested the presentation equipment. Richard Blackwell stood at the head of the table, rehearsing his opening remarks to an empty room, completely unaware that he was about to deliver the last presentation of his career. At 9:45, the elevator doors opened and Thomas Chen stepped out, flanked by 4 members of his investment committee. He was dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit, his expression pleasantly neutral, the face of a man who negotiated billion-dollar deals without revealing a single card. His eyes found Lily for just a second, a barely perceptible nod of acknowledgement, before turning to Richard with an extended hand. "Richard, good to see you. Thank you for accommodating the schedule change." "Of course, Thomas. We're always happy to adjust for our most valued client." Richard's smile was broad and confident. He had no idea he was shaking hands with a man who'd spent the last 48 hours reviewing evidence of his systematic abuse. "Let me introduce our senior team." The presentations began at 10 o'clock sharp. The first 2 accounts went smoothly. Senior analysts who knew their work, who'd actually built the analyses they were presenting. Richard relaxed visibly, settling into his chair with the confidence of a man watching his empire perform exactly as expected. Then came Brandon Mitchell and the Morrison account. Brandon stood at the front of the room, his face pale despite the professionally designed slides behind him, slides Lily had created 6 weeks ago. He clicked to the first analytical framework, cleared his throat, and began reading from his notes. For the first 3 minutes, it almost worked. The presentation was solid because the underlying work was solid. But then Thomas Chen raised his hand. "Brandon, quick question about your risk assessment model. Can you explain the specific variables you used for the Monte Carlo simulation?" Brandon's confident expression flickered. Yes, we used standard volatility measures. And which volatility measures specifically?" Thomas pressed, his tone still pleasant but sharpening. "Historical, implied, or a hybrid approach?" Brandon glanced at his notes, searching for an answer that wasn't there. "Historical volatility, based on..." "Interesting," Thomas interrupted, pulling out his tablet. "Because this footnote in your documentation suggests a hybrid model weighted 60-40 between implied and historical, which is actually more sophisticated. Can you walk us through why you chose that specific weighting?" Sweat appeared on Brandon's forehead. He looked at Richard, silently pleading for help. Richard's expression had shifted from confident to concerned, his eyes narrowing as he realized something was wrong. The weighting was based on market conditions that suggested..." "What market conditions?" Another committee member jumped in, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chin, no relation, but equally unforgiving of incompetence. "Your analysis references 3 specific indicators. Can you explain how those indicators led to your 60-40 split?" Brandon opened his mouth, closed it. The silence stretched for 5 agonizing seconds. "I'd need to review my detailed notes too." "You don't know," Thomas said quietly. Not a question, a statement. Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. "Thomas, perhaps we should..." "Who actually built this analysis, Brandon?" Thomas asked, ignoring Richard entirely, his voice still calm but carrying the weight of $3 billion in managed assets. "Because it's clear you didn't." The conference room fell into absolute silence. Brandon looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him. Richard's face had gone from concern to red with barely suppressed rage. "It was a team effort," Richard interjected smoothly, moving toward the front of the room. "Brandon worked with several analysts on this project." "Lily Chen built it," Brandon blurted out, his voice cracking. "All of it." "I was assigned the account last week, but she did the actual work. Every model, every projection, every analysis." "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have..." "Get out," Richard hissed at Brandon, his composure shattering. "Get out of this room right now." But Thomas held up a hand. "Actually, Brandon stays." "Everyone stays. Because I think we need to have a larger conversation about what's been happening at this firm." He turned to Lily, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner throughout the presentation. "Ms. Chun, would you mind stepping forward?" Lily stood,
her heart pounding but her expression calm, and walked to the front of the room. Richard's eyes followed her with pure venom, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. "Can you answer the questions I just asked?" Thomas inquired. "Yes, sir." The 60/40 weighting was based on 3 specific market indicators. The VIX volatility index trending above 22 for 3 consecutive weeks, credit spreads widening in the high-yield sector, and a divergence between realized and implied volatility in equity options markets. The hybrid model was more appropriate because we're in a transitional market phase where historical volatility doesn't capture forward-looking risks adequately. Patricia Chun smiled. "Perfect answer. Exactly what the documentation suggested."
Now tell me, why isn't your name on this presentation?
"Because Richard reassigned the account to Brandon last Thursday," Lily said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "After I'd completed 90% of the work."
He's done this repeatedly over the past 3 months, assigning me projects, letting me work on them for weeks, then giving them to other analysts right before completion while claiming I was inadequate.
Richard's face went from red to purple.
That is a complete lie, and I won't stand here, and, is it a lie?
Jennifer Walsh's voice cut through the room as she entered from the back door. Richard spun around, his expression shifting to shock as the HR compliance director walked forward carrying a folder that had grown substantially since Sunday. "Because I have documentation suggesting otherwise. Multiple instances. Multiple victims. Would you like me to share them?"
This is inappropriate,
Richard sputtered, looking at Thomas desperately. "This is a business review, not some kind of tribunal. These accusations are—" "Let's hear the evidence," Thomas said coldly, his pleasant mask finally dropping to reveal the steel underneath. "All of it." Jennifer opened her folder and pulled out a tablet. "I have 15 audio recordings of Richard Blackwell verbally abusing Miss Chen. Should I play them?" "No," Richard said quickly. "Thomas, this is clearly a setup. She's been—" "Play them," Thomas ordered. Jennifer pressed play, and Richard's voice filled the conference room. "You're too stupid to be here. Too stupid. Do you understand English? Or should I draw you a picture?" Richard lunged for the tablet, but Marcus Wells, who'd been sitting silently throughout the meeting, stood up and blocked him. "Don't," Marcus said quietly. "Just don't." The recordings continued.
3 months of abuse, condensed into 5 minutes of undeniable evidence.
Richard calling Lily the diversity hire. Richard telling her she cheated through business school. Richard describing her as garbage and mediocre and someone who doesn't belong here.
Every word time-stamped.
Every insult preserved forever in digital clarity.
By the time the recordings ended, Richard had collapsed back into his chair, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume on a man who'd been exposed as a fraud.
The committee members sat in stunned silence. Brandon had his head in his hands. Even the catering staff who'd remained in the room looked horrified. "That's not all," Jennifer continued, her voice flat and professional. "I have video evidence of Mr. Blackwell throwing documents at Miss Chen.
I have testimony from 12 former employees who left this firm specifically because of his behavior.
8 women, 7 people of color, multiple settlements paid out with NDAs that this company hoped would keep everything quiet. And I have documentation showing that senior partners were aware of these complaints and chose to ignore them because Richard Blackwell brings in revenue." Thomas Chun stood slowly, his expression colder than Lily had ever seen it.
"Richard, we've worked together for 8 years.
In that time, Blackwell and Associates has managed 40% of Chun Capital's portfolio. That's approximately $1.2 billion in assets under management. The fees from that relationship represent roughly $12 million annually to your firm." Richard's eyes flickered. With desperate hope, maybe Thomas would separate business from personal. Maybe the money would matter more than morality. "As of this moment," Thomas continued, his voice quiet but absolute, "Chun Capital is terminating our relationship with Blackwell and Associates. All accounts will be transferred to alternative management within 30 days. You'll receive formal notification by close of business today." The color drained from Richard's face. $12 million in annual revenue. Gone. 40% of the firm's portfolio. gone. In a single sentence, Thomas Chun had just destroyed Blackwell and Associates' financial foundation.
You can't do this,
Richard whispered, his voice hollow. We have contracts, obligations. You can't just read Section 7 of our agreement, Patricia Chen said crisply.
We can terminate for cause with 30 days. Notice if we determine that the management firm has engaged in conduct detrimental to our interests. I'd say systematically abusing employees, stealing their work, and creating a hostile work environment qualifies.
Our legal team will be in touch. Richard turned to the other analysts in the room, searching for support, for witnesses who'd contradict the recordings, for anyone who'd defend him. But Marcus Wells looked away. Brandon refused to meet his eyes. The senior analysts who'd laughed at his jokes and joined his cruelty suddenly found their phones fascinating. This is because she's your niece, Richard said, desperately grasping for something, anything. This is nepotism. You're destroying my firm because she complained to family. I'm destroying your firm because you're a bully who built your career on the backs of people you systematically broke, Thomas said, his voice carrying a rage that made everyone in the room flinch. Lily could be a complete stranger, and I'd still be pulling my money after hearing those recordings.
The fact that you targeted my niece just makes this personal, but the evidence? The pattern of abuse?
That makes it justice. If you're watching this story and you've ever worked for someone like Richard Blackwell, someone who made you feel small while they climbed higher on your broken confidence, make sure you're subscribed. Because what happened next proved that sometimes the fall from the top floor is even more devastating than the climb. Richard's phone began buzzing. Then buzzing again. And again. He pulled it out with shaking hands and Lily watched his face transform from rage to panic to pure horror as he read message after message. What? He whispered. Oh, Jennifer said casually. I should mention that copies of these recordings have been sent to the SAIC, the Department of Labor, and several journalists who cover workplace misconduct in financial services. I filed the official complaints this morning at 8 a.m. By now, I imagine quite a few people are reaching out for comment. Richard's phone didn't stop buzzing. News alerts.
Text messages. Emails from partners. A call from the firm's lawyer.
The evidence was spreading in real time, going viral through the professional networks he'd spent decades building, destroying everything he'd worked for with the same efficiency he'd used to destroy others. You're finished, Richard said, looking at Lily with pure hatred. I'll make sure you never work in this industry again.
I have connections, I have power.
You have nothing, Lily said quietly, speaking for the first time since the recordings played. You have no power over me. You never did. The only power you had was the power I gave you by being afraid. I'm not afraid anymore. She pulled out her own phone and held it up, showing the recording app that had been running throughout the entire meeting. And now you've just threatened me in front of witnesses, which I'm sure will be interesting to the investigators. Thank you for that. Richard stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't possible. He was Richard Blackwell. He was untouchable. You're fired, a new voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Martin Blackwell, the firm's founder and Richard's uncle, standing with 2 security guards. Clear out your office. You have 1 hour. Security will escort you. If you take anything beyond personal items, we'll add theft to the list of reasons why we're terminating you for cause. Martin, you can't. I built this firm. I brought in the clients. You brought in Chen Capital because your nephew happened to meet Thomas at a conference 8 years ago, and you rode that relationship while abusing everyone who worked under you, Martin said, his voice heavy with disgust. I've been reviewing Jennifer's files all morning. 7 years of complaints I never saw because you buried them. Settlements I didn't know we'd paid. This firm's reputation is about to be destroyed, and it's entirely your fault. Richard looked around the room one last time at the committee members who'd witnessed his exposure, at the analysts who'd watched him fall, at Jennifer Walsh who'd spent years documenting his sins, at Brandon who'd finally told the truth, at Lily Chen who'd quietly, methodically, patiently built the case that ended him. This isn't over, Richard said, but his voice carried no conviction.
It was the last gasp of a man who knew he'd already lost everything. Yes, it is, Lily replied. And she smiled not with cruelty, but with the simple satisfaction of watching justice arrive after 3 months of pain. It's completely over. Security escorted Richard from the conference room. Through the glass walls, the entire office watched him walk the corridor toward his office, toward the hour he had left in the building he'd terrorized for years. Phones were already out, recording, spreading the news through the office and beyond. By tomorrow, everyone in Manhattan's financial district would know what happened. By next week, Richard Blackwell would be unhireable. Thomas approached Lily, his professional mask finally cracking to reveal the uncle beneath. Are you okay? I'm better than okay, Lily said, and realized it was true. The fear that had lived in her chest for 3 months was gone, replaced by something that felt like freedom. Thank you for believing me. I always believed you, Thomas said. I was just waiting for you to be ready to fight. As the committee packed up and the meeting disbanded, Lily stood at the conference room window, watching Richard Blackwell emerge from the building 1 hour later with a small cardboard box, the traditional symbol of professional disgrace. She thought about the girl who'd arrived here 3 months ago, eager to prove herself, believing in meritocracy and hard work. That girl was gone, but in her place was someone stronger. Someone who'd learned that documentation was power, that patience was a weapon, and that justice, when it finally arrived, was worth every moment of suffering it took to achieve it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica Torres. I just saw the news. Thank you for finishing what I couldn't. You saved everyone who comes after us. Lily looked at the message and felt something shift in her chest. Not just vindication, but purpose. Richard Blackwell had fallen. But how many other Richards existed in other firms, other industries, other offices where people suffered in silence because they didn't have recordings, didn't have powerful uncles, didn't have the resources to fight back? The question hung in the air, heavy with possibility. 6 months later, Lily Chen stood in front of a conference room at Chen Capital's headquarters, not as a junior analyst fighting for survival, but as the firm's newly appointed Director of Workplace Ethics and Compliance. The title had been Thomas's idea, but the position had become Lily's passion. Her job was simple: make sure no one else ever went through what she had. The office was everything Blackwell and Associates had pretended to be: modern, professional, successful, but with one crucial difference. It was built on respect rather than fear. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan. But unlike Richard's corner office designed to intimidate, this space felt open and collaborative. 20 young analysts sat around the conference table, all new hires attending mandatory training on workplace rights and reporting procedures. Let me tell you a story, Lily began, clicking to her first slide. 6 months ago, I was working at a prestigious investment firm where my boss spent 3 months systematically trying to destroy me. He called me stupid. He stole my work. He humiliated me in front of colleagues and clients. And for a long time, I thought that was just how the industry worked, that suffering abuse was the price of success. She paused, making eye contact with several of the young analysts who sat with the same eager, slightly anxious expressions she'd once worn. I was wrong. And today, I'm going to teach you how to recognize abuse, how to document it, and how to fight back. Because the financial industry doesn't get to break you just because it's always done things a certain way. After the training session, Lily returned to her office to find Marcus Wells waiting outside. He'd left Blackwell and Associates 3 weeks after Richard's termination, unable to work for a firm that had enabled abuse for so long. Now he worked 2 floors down in Chun Capital's risk management division. Thought you'd want to see this, Marcus said, handing her his phone. The screen showed a LinkedIn post from Brandon Mitchell. After 6 months of soul-searching and facing hard truths about my own complicity in workplace abuse, I'm grateful to announce I'm starting a new position focused on ethical leadership development. To everyone I failed to stand up for, I'm sorry. To Lily Chen, thank you for showing me what courage actually looks like. Lily read it twice, then handed the phone back. People can change. Some people, Marcus agreed. Not all. Speaking of which, he pulled up another article. The headline read, Former Investment Executive Richard Blackwell faces federal investigation for workplace discrimination. The piece detailed the Department of Labor's probe into Blackwell and Associates, the 12 former employees who'd come forward with testimonies, and Richard's inability to find employment anywhere in the financial sector. His reputation was destroyed.
His career was over. Severance had been denied due to termination for cause. According to sources, he'd burned through his savings fighting legal battles he kept losing.
He tried to sue you last month,
Marcus said carefully.
Defamation, apparently. Did you hear about that?
My lawyer handled it. The judge dismissed it in preliminary hearings. Said truth is an absolute defense against defamation. Lily smiled without humor.
Richard still doesn't understand that recordings don't lie.
What Lily didn't tell Marcus was that Richard had tried calling her directly 3 times in the past month, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. She'd forwarded them all to her attorney without listening. There was nothing Richard Blackwell could say that she needed to hear.
His chapter in her life was closed. That evening, Lily met Jessica Torres for dinner at a small restaurant in Brooklyn.
Jessica looked different than she had 6 months ago, healthier, more confident, the haunted expression finally fading from her eyes. She'd started therapy, found a job at a nonprofit, and was slowly rebuilding the career Richard had destroyed. I testified at the Department of Labor hearing yesterday, Jessica said over wine. Told them everything. It was terrifying, but also freeing.
For 3 years, I thought I was crazy. I thought maybe I was too sensitive, maybe I deserved it. Maybe I just wasn't good enough for that industry.
You were always good enough, Lily said. The industry didn't deserve you. I spent so much time being angry at myself for not fighting back, Jessica continued. But watching what you did, how methodically you built your case, how patient you were, it made me realize that fighting back doesn't always look like immediate confrontation. Sometimes it looks like quiet documentation. Sometimes it looks like waiting for exactly the right moment. They talked for 2 hours about justice and healing, about the other former employees who'd come forward after Lily's recordings went public,
about the 3 other financial firms now facing investigations because victims finally felt brave enough to speak up. The ripple effects kept spreading.
One case of justice had inspired a dozen more. As Lily walked home through the Brooklyn streets, her phone rang. Uncle Thomas. Just got a call from the SEC, he said without preamble.
The investigation into Blackwell and Associates found evidence of securities
violations misrepresenting analyst credentials on client presentations, specifically.
They're recommending criminal charges against Richard and civil penalties against the firm.
Thought you'd want to know. Lily stopped walking, processing the information.
Criminal charges meant potential prison time.
Civil penalties meant Blackwell and Associates might not survive at all. The firm Richard's family had built over 3 decades, destroyed because one man had confused cruelty with leadership.
How do you feel about it? Thomas asked into the silence.
I feel like justice isn't just one thing, Lily said slowly. It's not just Richard losing his job or his reputation. It's every person who comes after me not having to go through what I went through. It's Jessica getting therapy and finding peace.
It's Brandon learning to stand up for what's right.
It's me standing in front of new analysts teaching them they don't have to accept abuse as normal.
That's a very wise perspective for a 27-year-old, Thomas said, and she could hear the smile in his voice.
I learned from the best. 3 weeks later, Lily stood in a university auditorium at Columbia Business School, invited to speak to graduating students about workplace ethics. 200 faces looked up at her, the next generation of analysts, consultants, executives.
Some of them would become leaders. Some would face abuse. Some might even become abusers themselves if no one taught them differently.
I graduated from this program 18 months ago, Lily began. I thought I knew everything. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I proved my value, if I was smart and dedicated and excellent, I'd succeed. I believed in meritocracy. She paused, letting that word hang in the air.
Then I met my boss, Richard Blackwell. He taught me that meritocracy doesn't exist if the people in power are allowed to abuse the people beneath them without consequences. He spent 3 months trying to break me.
He almost succeeded. Lily clicked to a slide showing the now famous photo of her walking out of Blackwell and
Associates on the day Richard was fired, briefcase in hand,
head held high,
an image that had been shared across social media as a symbol of standing up to workplace abuse. But here's what Richard Blackwell didn't understand, and what I need all of you to understand. Your worth is not determined by someone else's cruelty. Your value doesn't decrease because someone powerful decides to target you. And documentation evidence, recordings, written records is the most powerful weapon you have against people who think their position makes them untouchable. She spent the next hour teaching them everything she'd learned. How to recognize the signs of a toxic workplace. How to document abuse legally and effectively. When to report internally versus externally. How to build a case that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. How to survive until you were ready to fight back. During the Q&A session, a young woman in the third row raised her hand. But what if you don't have a powerful uncle? What if you don't have resources or connections? What if you're just a regular person who can't afford to lose their job? It was the question Lily had been waiting for. The question she asked herself every day. That's exactly why I do this work now, Lily said. Because most people don't have what I had. Most people can't risk fighting back because they need the paycheck. Because they don't have family support. Because the system is designed to protect powerful abusers over vulnerable victims. That's why we need to change the system itself. She clicked to her final slide, showing the logo for a new organization, the Workplace Justice Alliance. Beside it were photos of Lily, Jennifer Walsh, Jessica Torres, and 7 other former victims of workplace abuse who'd joined together to create something new. We launched this nonprofit last month, Lily explained. Free legal support for employees facing workplace abuse. Anonymous reporting systems. Resources for documentation. A database of companies with repeated complaints so job seekers can make informed decisions. We're building the support system that should have existed all along. The auditorium erupted in applause. After the presentation, Lily was surrounded by students wanting advice, wanting to share their own stories of internships where they'd been mistreated, wanting to know how they could help. She stayed for 2 hours, talking to each person who needed it, because she remembered being that student idealistic and hopeful and unaware of how dark the professional world could become. On the subway ride home, Lily's phone buzzed with an email from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line made her pause. Thank you from Sarah Blackwell. She opened it hesitantly. Miss Chun, you don't know me, but I'm Richard Blackwell's daughter. I just wanted to say thank you for exposing what my father did. My mother and I left him 2 months ago after learning about his behavior at work. I always knew he was cruel at home, but I didn't realize how far it extended. Watching him face consequences for his actions taught me that abusers don't get to hide behind their careers or their reputations forever. You gave me courage to stop making excuses for him. I'm sorry for what he put you through. Sarah Lily read the email 3 times, her chest tight with unexpected emotion. She'd been so focused on her own justice that she hadn't considered the other victims, the family members who'd lived with Richard's cruelty in private. Even in his downfall, he'd left casualties. But maybe some of those casualties were finally finding freedom. She typed a careful response. Sarah, you don't owe me an apology for your father's behavior, but I appreciate you reaching out. If you ever need support or resources, please let me know. You deserved better than what he gave you. Lily. 1 year after the recordings went public, Lily Chen sat in her apartment. A real apartment now. 2 bedrooms in a safe neighborhood, with furniture she'd actually chosen instead of whatever fit her budget, and reflected on how far she traveled. The scared, desperate junior analyst who'd stood in that conference room clutching torn papers was gone, replaced by someone stronger, but also, paradoxically, kinder. Suffering hadn't made her bitter. It had made her purposeful. Richard Blackwell had tried to destroy her. He'd called her stupid, stolen her work, humiliated her publicly, and done everything in his power to prove she didn't belong. Instead, he'd taught her the most valuable lesson of her career, that the people who try hardest to break you are usually the ones most afraid you'll surpass them. He'd been right to be afraid. Blackwell and Associates had dissolved 6 months ago, unable to survive the loss of Chung Capital, the federal investigations, and the reputational damage. Richard faced federal charges for securities fraud. His marriage had ended. His daughter had cut contact. Every door that had once been open to him was now permanently closed. He'd built his empire on cruelty and discovered too late that foundations made of broken people eventually collapse. Meanwhile, Lily had built something different. The Workplace Justice Alliance was growing, helping 36 cases in its first 6 months. Jennifer Walsh had joined as executive director. Jessica Torres ran their counseling program. Marcus Wells headed their documentation training. Even Brandon Mitchell volunteered on weekends, trying to atone for his complicity by helping others find their courage faster than he'd found his. They were creating something that would outlast all of them. A system where reporting abuse didn't require family connections or secret recordings or desperate measures. A system where just work harder wasn't the only advice given to people suffering at the hands of cruel bosses. A system where justice was accessible to everyone, not just those with resources to fight back. Lily's phone buzzed with a notification. Another message from someone who'd seen her Columbia presentation. Another person asking for help. Another story of workplace abuse that needed documentation and support and justice. She opened her laptop and started typing a response, because this was her work now. Not just surviving Richard Blackwell's cruelty, but making sure his kind of cruelty became extinct. The best revenge, Lily had learned, isn't destroying the person who hurt you. Though watching Richard lose everything had certainly provided a satisfying sense of closure. The best revenge is building something so meaningful from your pain that their attempt to break you becomes the origin story of your greatest achievement. Richard Blackwell tried to prove that Lily Chen was too stupid, too inadequate, too worthless to belong in his world. Instead, he proved that she was smart enough to document everything, patient enough to wait for the right moment, and strong enough to transform her suffering into a movement that would protect thousands of people from ever experiencing what she endured. He wanted to make her small. She became essential. He wanted to silence her. She became a voice for the voiceless. He wanted to end her career. She built an entirely new one from the ashes of his cruelty. That's the thing about trying to destroy people who are stronger than you realize, sometimes. You just give them the motivation to become unstoppable. And if you've ever felt small because someone powerful made you question your worth, if you've ever been told you're not good enough by someone threatened by your potential, remember Lily's story. Remember that documentation is power, that patience can be a weapon, and that the person trying to break you might just be teaching you exactly how strong you really are. Subscribe to hear more stories of justice that prove the powerful don't always win, and the people they underestimate sometimes become exactly the reckoning they should have feared all along.